Star Trek, Primitive Passenger Season 5, Episode 4, Control Group. The former Cardassian cargo holds on Empire North bore little resemblance to their original design. Nolan Mercer stood at the entrance of the converted cloning laboratory, watching Dr. Nagma Colmack arrange her equipment with meticulous precision. The Cardassian scientist moved with deliberate grace, each placement exact, her attention fully absorbed in her work. "The environmental controls are holding steady," Alara said, examining a nearby console. "We've compensated for the higher heat Cardassians prefer." Nolan nodded. "Natima, the first batch of genetic samples is ready whenever you want to begin preliminary analysis." The scientist looked up from her work, her expression focused. "The sequencing units need recalibration. Whoever last used this equipment clearly had no understanding of proper maintenance protocols." "The Dominion isn't known for their careful documentation," Nolan replied. "But everything you need for modifications is at your disposal." Footsteps in the corridor drew their attention. Kilana appeared in the doorway, carrying a datapad. She hesitated for a moment before entering, her eyes taking in the transformed space. "Welcome to your new laboratory," Nolan said. The casual tone didn't quite mask the tension underlying his words. Kilana's gaze settled on Natima, studying the Cardassian with careful neutrality. "Dr. Colmack, your work on genetic degradation in clone matrices is impressive, as is your intimate knowledge of Vorta neural programming," Natima replied, her voice carrying that peculiar Cardassian mix of courtesy and scrutiny. "I look forward to comparing notes on our respective areas of expertise." Lexa, who had been configuring security protocols at a side station, straightened. "I've encrypted all laboratory access. No data leaves this room without direct authorization. We'll need separate containment fields for the active samples," Natima said, returning to her equipment calibration. "The degradation rate accelerates when different genetic lines interact." Kilana moved to an unused workstation, setting down her pad. "I can help with the calibrations. I'm familiar with Dominion laboratory protocols." "Good," Nolan said. Work together. Learn from each other. But remember, everything stays in this lab." He looked between the two women. "Clear?" Both scientists nodded, already absorbed in their work. Nolan stepped back, allowing them space to establish their routine. He caught Ilara's eye and gestured toward the door. As they left the laboratory, Ilara spoke quietly. "Are you sure about this combination? A Cardassian scientist and a Vorta defector working with Dominion cloning technology." "They're the best in their fields," Nolan replied, "and they both have reasons to want this to succeed." He paused, glancing back at the laboratory entrance. "Besides, sometimes the most interesting results come from unexpected combinations." Behind them, the sounds of scientific equipment powering up filled the converted cargo bay. The work had begun. Nolan strode through the dimly lit corridors of Empire North, Lexa matching his pace. The endless hum of the station's systems provided a steady backdrop to their conversation. "The drones are picking up increased activity in the Parthak sector," Lexa reported. "Multiple Dominion convoys rerouting to avoid where we hit them last. They've doubled escort strength on every shipment." "Smart," Nolan said, "but predictable." "What else?" 3 more cloning facilities have gone dark. They're either shutting them down or moving them deeper into their territory." A note of satisfaction crept into her voice. "Our raids have them spooked. They've pulled back nearly 40% of their Jem'Hadar forces from the delta side of the wormhole." They entered the turbolift. "Ops," Nolan commanded. "There's something else," Lexa added. "The drones detected unusual energy signatures near the Calandra sector. Could be weapons testing, but the pattern doesn't match anything in our database." The turbolift doors opened onto Ops, where Alara stood before a massive holographic display of the Alpha Quadrant. Battle lines and fleet movements glowed in various colors, painting a stark picture of the war's progress in the Alpha. "The Klingons broke through Dominion lines at Tyra," Alara said as they approached. but they lost nearly 40 ships doing it. The Romulans are holding position at Glintara, waiting for reinforcements from the Federation's 7th Fleet. Nolan studied the display. Any sign of cloning facilities in the Alpha Quadrant? Nothing confirmed, Ilar replied. Though we've detected elevated Tetrion emissions in 3 sectors that could indicate white production. Lexus stepped closer to the display. I've been working on correlating supply chain movements with power signatures. The Dominion's getting better at hiving their facilities, but they can't mask their resource requirements. Give me another week of data, and I think I can narrow down some locations. Good, Nolan said, because once we get our facility operational, I want to know exactly where to hit them in the Alpha, even if we pass the work on to the Klingons. Natima Colmack peered through a microscope, making minute adjustments to the sample's position. Though focused on her work, she remained acutely aware of Kilana's presence at the adjacent workstation. The converted bays hummed with the sound of analytical equipment. The cellular degradation rate is fascinating, Natima said, more to herself than her companion. No wonder the Jem'Hadar require such frequent replacement. The Founders designed them to be expendable, Kilana replied, her attention on a genetic sequencing display. After a moment's hesitation, she added, much like the Vorta, I suppose. She turned to face the Cardassian scientist. Though I confess I'm curious why a daughter of Cardassia works against both the Dominion and her own people. Natima's laugh was sharp and bitter. How deliciously ironic, coming from you. She straightened from her microscope, fixing Kilana with an appraising stare. The Dominion is a plague, consuming everything in its path. It devours worlds, strips them of resources, and leaves behind only soldiers and servants. She began preparing another sample, her movements precise and controlled. I watched them sink their claws into Cardassia, saw how they corrupted our military, our government, even our sciences. They don't form alliances, they infect. You could have defected to the Federation, Kilana observed. The Federation, Natima scoffed, with their endless committees and moral debates. And the Klingons would simply torture what they wanted from me before providing an unnecessarily dramatic execution. She sealed the sample container with a decisive click. Mercer was the only logical choice. He offers protection, resources, and, most importantly, the freedom to continue my work. She turned back to Kilana, one eye ridge raised. And what of you? How does a Vorta geneticist end up in Mercer's employ? Kilana's fingers traced patterns on her console. He took a cloning facility. I was there. He gave me a choice, help him understand the technology, or face rather permanent consequences. A small smile played at her lips, though I suspect he would have found my death distasteful. And now? Now, Kilana paused, considering. Now I find myself fascinated by the possibilities. The Founders built us for loyalty, but they never considered that we might choose to be loyal to something else. To someone else. Natima nodded slowly. Yes, I've noticed how you look at him, and I've noticed how you avoid the subject of what he plans to do with this facility, Kilana countered. Both women fell silent, returning to their work. The unspoken truth hung between them. They had each chosen their path, and now they would see where it led. Nolan materialized directly in the infirmary on Deep Space Nine, causing Dr. Julian Bashir to nearly drop the medical tricorder he was holding. Mr. Mercer, Bashir said, recovering quickly, I don't suppose it occurred to you to use the docking ring. Now where's the fun in that? Nolan settled into a chair near Bashir's desk. Besides, I hear it drives Odo crazy. Speaking of which, how long do you think before he storms in here? About 30 seconds, give or take. Bashir set down his tricorder. What can I do for you? I'm interested in your experience with the Jem'Hadar infant, the one you helped raise on the station. Nolan kept his tone casual as he pulled out his pad. Must have been quite the learning opportunity. Bashir's expression shifted subtly, becoming more guarded. That was quite some time ago. Why the sudden interest? Academic curiosity. I've had some recent encounters with Jem'Hadar forces. Made me wonder about their development process. Encounters. Bashir pulled up files on his console, positioned so Nolan couldn't see the screen. You mean like the destruction of that Ketracel White facility in the Gamma Quadrant? Nolan's pad quietly connected to the station's medical database. Oh, you heard about that? News travels fast. It does when someone eliminates an entire garrison of Jem'Hadar soldiers. Bashir studied Nolan carefully. The infant was a unique case. His accelerated growth rate was fascinating, but ultimately tragic. How fast did he mature? I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics. Bashir tapped at his console. Though I'm curious about your interest in Jem'Hadar physiology. Planning something? Doctor, would I tell you if I was? Nolan's pad silently downloaded Bashir's research files. Let's just say I like to know my enemy. The Jem'Hadar aren't just soldiers, Mr. Mercer. They're living beings, engineered or not. Living weapons, Nolan corrected, designed for one purpose. The infirmary doors slid open, revealing Odo's stern face. Mr. Mercer, bypassing station security again, I see. Odo. Nolan stood, tucking his pad away. I was just leaving. Always a pleasure, Doctor. He tapped his comm badge twice and vanished before Odo could respond. Bashir shook his head, turning back to his console. After a moment, his eyes narrowed. Computer, run a diagnostic on database access for the past 5 minutes. Unable to comply, the computer responded. Recent access logs have been corrupted. Bashir looked up at Odo and sighed. I thought as much. Nolan strode into the laboratory, his arrival interrupting the quiet rhythm of scientific work. Ladies, I've acquired some interesting data from Starfleet Medical. Research on a Jem'Hadar infant they found a few years back. The one Dr. Bashir studied? Kilana asked, looking up from her console. We had reports about that incident. The founders were displeased. I bet they were, Natima said, moving to examine the data on Nolan's pad. A Jem'Hadar raised outside their control structure. That must have terrified them. She scrolled through the files. Fascinating. Look at these neural development patterns. Kilana joined them, her eyes widening as she studied the readings. The genetic programming didn't fully activate without the presence of other Jem'Hadar. Isolation affected his basic behavioral patterns. Like a computer program missing key subroutines, Natima mused. Environmental triggers shaped the expression of genetic coding. She glanced at Nolan. Much like your own experience with the Enconite, yes? Nolan's expression hardened slightly. The pod changed me. Rewired my brain for warfare. But you retained your sense of self, Kilana observed. Unlike the Jem'Hadar, who are born with their purpose already encoded in their DNA. She paused, her voice growing quieter. Like the Vorta, Natima looked between them. Yet here you are, questioning your programming, making choices the founders never intended. Are they really my choices? Kilana asked, more to herself than the others. Or simply unexpected variations in my coding? The fact that you're asking the question suggests an answer, Nolan said. The Jem'Hadar never question their purpose. They never doubt. Neither did I. Once, Kilana admitted. She turned back to the data. These readings suggest that isolation from the collective actually strengthened individual neural pathways. Without the constant reinforcement of genetic programming, the mind finds its own way, Natima finished. Perhaps that's what terrified the founders most of all. They worked in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Nolan spoke. Keep studying those files. I want to know everything about how their programming works and how it can be broken. And what am I programming? Kilana asked softly, not looking up from her work. Nolan studied her profile, noting the tension in her shoulders. That's up to you to decide. Isn't that what free will is all about? Natima made a small sound of agreement. Freedom is terrifying. But it's better than being a puppet, don't you think? The three of them continued their work, the quiet beeping of laboratory equipment providing a steady rhythm to their thoughts. Each of them knew what it meant to break free of conditioning, whether genetic or mechanical. The question now was what they would build in its place. Kilana adjusted settings on her console, but her attention kept drifting to the other side of the laboratory. Nolan and Natima stood close together over a display screen, their heads nearly touching as they examined data on genetic sequencing patterns. "If we modify this sequence here," Natima said, her finger tracing a line of code, "we could potentially stabilize the growth rate." Her other hand rested casually on Nolan's arm as she leaned in closer. "Show me," Nolan replied, his focus entirely on the screen. Kilana found herself studying their easy interaction. The way Natima's laugh carried across the lab at something Nolan said, the casual brushes of contact as they worked, the complete lack of tension between them. A sharp pain in her palm made Kilana look down. She'd gripped her stylus so tightly it had left marks in her skin. The realization of what she was feeling hit her like a physical blow. "Jealousy," she whispered under her breath. The emotion was so foreign, so unexpected, that she nearly dropped the stylus. Vorta weren't supposed to feel jealousy. They were designed for loyalty, for devotion to the Founders, not for this. "Kilana?" Nolan's voice snapped her back to the present. "What do you think about these latent protein sequences?" She forced herself to look up, to maintain her composure. "They're promising, though the degradation rate might be problematic." Her voice sounded strained even to her own ears. Natima raised an eye ridge. "Are you all right? You seem distracted." "I'm fine," Kilana said quickly. Too quickly. "Just processing some anomalous data." Nolan studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned back to the display, continuing his discussion with Natima. Kilana returned to her work, though her mind churned with unwelcome thoughts. She had been engineered to serve the Founders, to find joy in their approval alone. These feelings, this burning in her chest when she watched Nolan with Natima, weren't part of her design. What else about her was changing? How much of what she felt had come from genetic programming, and how much from genuine emotion? The questions terrified her almost as much as the feelings themselves. She caught her reflection in a darkened screen, the same face she'd worn through countless iterations, yet somehow different now. Changed, evolving. The work continued around her as she struggled with her internal turmoil. Neither Nolan nor Natima seemed to notice her distraction, and she wasn't sure if that made it better or worse. The Maldor cruiser drifted, powerless and dark, a brick-shaped shadow against the void. Inside, Nolan Mercer stood motionless, twin katanas ready, his breathing steady. Through the narrow viewport, an asteroid facility slowly rotated into view, its artificial structures stark against the rocky surface. The distance between vessel and asteroid decreased with glacial precision. Nolan's muscles tensed. The park. Reality shattered. Nolan materialized in a burst of crimson energy, already in motion. The first Jem'Hadar died before the transport effect faded, his throat opening in a purple spray. The second lost his head entirely, the blade's art continuing into a third guard's chest. Screamed, equipment crashed. Purple Jem'Hadar blood mixed with the Vorta's green ichor, painting the laboratory walls in alien abstract art. Nolan spun between two guards, blades extended. Their torsos slid apart diagonally. A Vorta scientist reached for a weapon. Nolan's blade took her hand, then her head. Another guard rushed him with a Cardassian. Nolan dropped and rolled, hamstringing him, then drove both blades up through his spine. 3 Jem'Hadar opened fire. Nolan used a dead guard as a shield, then hurled one katana. It pinwheeled through the air, taking one shooter through the eye. Nolan closed the distance to the others, his remaining blade dancing. Limbs flew, blood fountained. A Vorta cowered under a console. Nolan's boot caught him in the face, sending teeth scattering across the floor. The last 2 guards came at him together. He met their charge with terrible efficiency, his blade finding gaps in their armor, severing arteries, splitting organs. The final Vorta backed away, hands raised. "Please," Nolan's blade answered, opening her from collar to navel. The laboratory had become a slaughterhouse. Blood dripped from every surface. Bodies and parts of bodies littered the floor. Nolan stood in the center of the carnage, his black clothing slick with various alien fluids, his breath still steady. He shrugged off his pack, extracted a small device, and activated it. The device's light pulsed ominously. Bark. The Maldor's transporter effect scattered the blood spray further as Nolan vanished. The device counted down, its light accelerating. Silence. Then light. Heat. The laboratory's atmosphere ignited, turning the enclosed space into a momentary sun. The structure's hull ruptured, vomiting its grisly contents into space. From the Maldor's dark bridge, Nolan watched the facility burn. A subtle flash marked his ship's departure, leaving only debris and death spinning in the void. Nolan loathed sitting around in garrison. He always had. Wise. The laboratory hummed with the energy of breakthrough. Holographic DNA strands rotated above the main workstation, showing the successful integration of Cardassian genetic stabilization techniques with Vorta cloning protocols. "The cellular degradation is down to less than 2%, Natima announced, her usual cool demeanor betraying a hint of excitement. "The Cardassian regenerative sequences are actually enhancing the base genetic structure. And the neural pathways are maintaining stability," Kilana added quickly. "The loyalty protocols can be modified without compromising basic functions." She glanced at Nolan, seeking his reaction. "Outstanding work, both of you." Nolan studied the data scrolling across his screen. "This goes beyond anything I'd hoped for." Natima moved closer to him, pointing out specific sequences. "The real breakthrough was combining our approaches. Cardassian genetic science is surprisingly compatible with Dominion technology." "The Vorta understanding of neural programming was crucial," Kilana interjected, her voice carefully measured. "Without it, the integration would have failed." Nolan looked between them, a slight smile playing at his lips. "You both exceeded expectations. Keep this up, then we'll be ready for initial trials soon." Later, after Natima and Nolan had left the lab, Kilana found herself wandering the quieter sections of Empire North. She wasn't surprised when Alara fell into step beside her. "You seem troubled," Alara observed. Kilana stopped at a viewport, watching distant stars. "I don't understand these feelings. They weren't part of my design." "Few things about Nolan fit anyone's design," Alara said softly. "At first I thought he loved only you, Alara," Kilana said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's like his heart is above it all. When there's not enough to keep it afloat, it drifts down here with us." She pressed her palm against the cold viewport. "I wasn't made for this kind of confusion." "None of us were," Alara replied. "I was created to run ship systems, not to feel." Natima was trained for scientific precision, not passion. Even Nolan was reconstructed for war, not love. She turned to face Kilana. "Yet here we all are. How do you bear it?" "By accepting that growth means changing beyond our original programming." Ilara's voice carried centuries of understanding. "The Founders made you adaptable, Kilana. Perhaps they didn't realize just how adaptable you could become." Kilana stared out at the stars, her reflection ghostly in the viewport. "I feel things I was never supposed to feel. Want things I was never supposed to want." "Welcome to freedom," Ilara said simply. "It's terrifying, isn't it?" A small laugh escaped Kilana. "Absolutely terrifying." She turned to Ilara. "Does it get easier?" "No," Ilara smiled. "But you get stronger." They stood in companionable silence, watching the stars. Two beings created for specific purposes, now charting their own courses through uncharted emotional territory. Somewhere in the station, Nolan Mercer continued his work, unaware of the profound changes he sparked in those around him. Or perhaps, Kilana thought, he knew exactly what he was doing all along. Epilogue. Bashir and Worf. But why the total evisceration of every Jem'Hadar in the entire facility? Dr. Julian Bashir debated with Commander Worf in the med bay. "It doesn't make sense, Mercer," Worf replied, as if saying the name was a bad taste in his mouth. "Rarely seems to make sense, but I assure you, he always has some sort of scheme in the works." Julian pacing. "He leaves no bodies on the ground, no corpses tumbling in space, battleships devoid of any personnel. It's like he's erasing the Jem'Hadar from the timeline. What's the point of it all? I have talked with Martok on this matter. Apparently he is in contact with Mercer." Seemingly disgusted at the idea. Mercer says, "The Dominion is a toothless old cat without the Jem'Hadar. So indeed he is doing his best to erase them." Looking Julian in the eye, Mercer has a protocol. Any and all Jem'Hadar in scanner range are automatically transported and held in a pattern buffer. They are then rematerialized inside the coronal atmosphere of the nearest star. Nothing to start over with. No new clones. He turned around to Worf. "He's attacking Ketracel white factories and supply lines. Jem'Hadar die without the white. They go mad and kill their Vorta overlords. Oh, and apparently he's attacking cloning facilities in the Alpha Quadrant as well." Worf enunciating that last part for emphasis, if that can be believed. "Worf, no matter what you think of the man, he may be our greatest ally against the Dominion." Julian's tone light, almost happy. Worf frowned back at Julian. "He's right, you know. If all the Jem'Hadar vanished, do you really think a handful of shapeshifters in Vorta would stand a chance?" "I don't like it," Worf barked. "It is not right to just snap somebody up and scatter his molecules to the cosmos. You can't kill 1,000,000 Jem'Hadar with one bat'leth Worf. We're outmanned in this conflict, and as long as the Founders can keep pumping out more Jem'Hadar, we will remain so." He handed Worf a tube of ointment. "Put that on the burn before bed. You should be all healed up by this time tomorrow." Epilogue. The ambient chatter of Quark's bar provided a familiar backdrop as Dr. Julian Bashir and Garrick sat at their usual table. The Cardassian tailor sipped his Kanar, eyeing his human friend with a mixture of amusement and curiosity. Bashir leaned forward, his voice low but intense. But Garrick, to just wipe them out on a mass scale like that, selecting and sorting by DNA, collecting Vorta, and dumping tens of thousands of Jem'Hadar into the sun. His voice became shrill toward the end, drawing a few curious glances from nearby patrons. Garrick's eyes twinkled with barely suppressed mirth. "Why, Julian, I often thought of you as a bit naive when it comes to the serious matters of war and intrigue. But are you going to tell me that now you've developed a soft spot for the Jem'Hadar? Please tell me what led to this newfound fondness." "It's not like that," Bashir protested, swirling his drink. "Every one of them Mercer tosses screaming into the sun is one less that Starfleet, or the Klingons, or whoever else has to kill and risk themselves doing so. I've treated the wounded, I've consulted with colleagues, I've seen my friends' names on the casualty reports." Garak had started chuckling when Julian mentioned Mercer tossing the screaming Jem'Hadar into the sun, the vivid picture giving him a moment of dark humor. "Would you have it in you, Julian?" Garak asked, leaning in closer. "If you had the capability to pour the lives of hundreds of thousands of Jem'Hadar into the sun, snuffing them out and erasing them from the galaxy." He took a deliberate sip of his Kanar for dramatic effect. "Would you have it in you to do what it takes to end a war and save the entire Alpha Quadrant?" Bashir fell silent, his gaze dropping to his untouched drink. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. "Boy, I don't know," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Part of me wants to say no, that there must be another way. But then I think of all the lives that could be saved, all the suffering that could be prevented." Garrick nodded, his expression softening slightly. "And that, my dear doctor, is the burden of war. It's easy to stand on principle when you're far from the front lines, reading casualty reports and consulting. But when faced with the reality of conflict, even the most idealistic among us must confront uncomfortable truths. Perhaps that's what drives a man like Mercer." Bashir looked up, meeting Garrick's eyes. But at what cost, Garrick? If we abandon our principles to win, what's left of us afterward? Perhaps, Garak mused, swirling his Kanar. The real question is not whether we can afford to take such actions, but whether we can afford not to. In the face of an enemy like the Dominion, can the Federation truly cling to its ideals and survive? He leaned in, his voice lowering. Consider this, Doctor. Mercer has chosen to shoulder a terrible burden. He's willing to take risks, to make choices that others can't or won't. In doing so, he's potentially preserving the Federation's ability to maintain its lofty principles. Bashir frowned, considering this. You're suggesting that by doing the unthinkable, Mercer is actually protecting our ideals? In a way, yes, Garak replied. By taking on these morally questionable actions, he allows the Federation to keep its hands clean. It's a pragmatic approach, one that recognizes the necessities of war while still striving to preserve something greater. That's a dangerous line of thinking, Garak, Bashir warned, though his tone was more contemplative than accusatory. Garak smiled enigmatically. Perhaps. But in times like these, Doctor, it's often the dangerous thinkers who make the difference between victory and defeat. Mercer understands this. This is far from his first war, I'm sure. Epilogue. Epilogue. Bashir and Kira Julian found Major Kira on the upper level of the promenade, staring out at the wormhole. The blue glow of the station's exterior lights cast shadows across her face. You've been unusually quiet since the reports came in, he said, joining her at the viewport. Kira didn't turn. Mercer's methods. She shook her head slightly, a hint of bitterness lacing her words. Everyone's so focused on the brutality, the body count. But I can't shake the cold precision of it all. Precision? During the occupation, we planted bombs, staged attacks. Civilians died. Cardassian and Bajoran both. Her voice was flat, almost detached. We told ourselves it was necessary, that any cost was justified for freedom. But that was a lie. We just didn't have better options. We were desperate and reckless. She finally turned to face him, her eyes hard. But Mercer, he's not reckless. Every Jem'Hadar killed, every Vorta captured, every facility taken. It's all part of some grand plan. It's calculated, almost clinical. That sounds like admiration, Julian said carefully. Admiration? Kira's laugh was sharp, humorless. Maybe it would be, if I didn't know him better. The resistance fighter in me sees the effectiveness, sure. But the militia officer, the part of me that knows what peace is supposed to look like, sees only the horror. She paused, her expression darkening. Do you know what Shkar used to say about him? Your old resistance leader? He called Mercer complete scum. Galactic garbage, he called him. But we never turned down the weapons and supplies he brought. Kira's jaw tightened. Even when those same weapons turned our streets into rivers of blood, because the Cardassians retaliated even harder. We were complicit in it, even when we wanted to look away. Julian leaned against the railing. How do you make sense of it, Commander? The man your own mentor hated, now conducting mass executions across 2 quadrants. Make sense of it? Kira's eyes narrowed. I don't think we ever saw him for what he really was. We were too blinded by our own fight to notice. She crossed her arms, a scowl creasing her face. Mercer's always been this way, a man willing to do whatever it takes. Back then, it just happened to benefit us. Now, it's benefiting the Alpha Quadrant, one massacre at a time.